Okay, so I think no, we can start. Pere, estem començant. Si voleu, yeah, Jürgen, we are starting. We are starting. We are online. Okay. Okay, thank you, and welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming. We are starting this workshop, and you have the information on military spending. It's the workshop that we organized from the Global Campaign on Military Spending that we manage from the IPB office in Barcelona. That is the main campaign for the International Peace Bureau, and it's a campaign that is for more of a decade working to let's say to try to get a bigger group of organizations pushing to lobby governments to reduce military spending. We have today several speakers that I'm going to introduce now. Let me go to the information. We have Perlo-Freeman, we have Roisin Putti, Emily Rubino, Leticia Sedou, Jürgen Grasslin, and Pere Ortega. So we have six speakers. That means that we really need to be to respect the time that we have for the presentation. We need to be really focused in our presentation to have time enough for a bit of debate or a change when we finish our presentations. So please, I also ask to understand that we are using the hybrid platform and all the people in the room and different computers. So maybe things are not working as we expect, but we are trying to do our best. Okay, so we are going to proceed in a way that we are asking in the order that we have the people, as I said, the speakers in this order, and the people that is in the room. I will ask you to come here. You can sit in this chair, and I will put this camera that I think they can take you better for the online. Otherwise, if you are there or you are just there, it's very small when you sit from home. So the first speaker is Perlo that is not yet here. So we are going to start with the next one. That is, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing well the name, Roisin Putti. If I'm not doing it well, please tell me. Okay, so let me introduce Roisin. Roisin Putti is a human rights advocate at Nonviolence International. Has worked on bilateral meetings at the UN Assembly, addressing humanitarian concerns, and she has provided research assistance to judges at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and has articulated issues of artistic freedom using a human rights framework of Artistic Freedom Initiative, creating strategic networks of human rights organizations throughout the world in order to build a united global front against persecution and censorship. So, Roisin, the floor is yours, and as you are at home or wherever you are, you can start directly, and we'll see you in the screen right now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've just shared my screen, just confirming that you can see that. Great.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Thank you. Good morning from New York, and good afternoon to everyone in Barcelona. Thank you so much for your patience as I present virtually today. amidst all the Zoom fatigue that we're all experiencing for so long now. I'm speaking on behalf of Nonviolence International Canada, which sits on the board of the International Peace Bureau. So in that capacity, I want to welcome you all here today. I'm glad so many of you were able to convene in person. What I've opened here to start our discussion is Nonviolence International Canada's estimated global military spending for 2020. I think the graphic speaks for itself, and it underlines the immediacy of the events like this that we're having today. A principal aim of Nonviolence International Canada's research was to add our voices to the growing chorus of state and civil society representatives who denounce high and unconstrained military spending and view it as a significant threat to humanity in itself. Our hope was that by outlining who the most militarized states are, how much they spend, their assessment of risk, and their record on other issues of humanitarian disarmament, we can continue to exert pressure and put this issue firmly on the humanitarian disarmament agenda. Our report, available on the Nonviolence International Canada website, pulls together data from three distinct but interconnected threads. First, relying on figures from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, we look at who the most militarized countries were between 2010 and 2019. Then we used defense white papers to ascertain what motivates the spending. Finally, we looked at states' membership of key disarmament treaties and advocacy networks to understand their commitment to humanitarian disarmament. I've listed the 30 most militarized states between 2010 and 2019, as well as the amount each spent in that time. There's a lot of data here to digest, but I would encourage you all to take a look at the full report at a later time, which is, as I say, available on the Nonviolence International Canada website. In total, these 30 militarized states spent over 15 trillion on weapons and militaries in the last decade. To make sense of that figure, let's think about the fact that 0.3% of that figure would achieve quality primary and secondary education for all. 0.6% of that figure would pay for the initial costs of adapting to climate change in developing countries. 1.6% of that figure would eliminate extreme poverty and hunger. We could have all three of these things with about 2.5% of what these 30 countries spent on weapons in a decade. Against that stark background, it is worth thinking about what motivates this kind of spending. What do highly militarized states perceive as threats? While analyzing the white papers and policy documents, which were available for 24 of the 30 countries we studied, certain similarities emerged in the threats that were being asserted. These commonly cited threats are listed here in the slide. As we can see, all 24 states with data cited terrorism as a threat. A similarly high 21 states referred to the threat of nuclear weapons. 18 mentioned crime, while 17 mentioned the environment. On the lower end of things, we see 13 countries mentioning threats related to public health, 12 countries referring to informal migration, 10 referring to the economy, and 7 detailing technology and intelligence advances. Essentially, these 10 categories are the purported reasons why these states spend trillions on their national militaries, and it's a broad range of threats. As you can see, some are more conventional, while others are newer and emergent threats. The next question our report asked is how these 30 countries behave in the area of disarmament and international humanitarian law. We relied on the humanitarian disarmament movement as a model for progressive behavior in the area of disarmament. I know I'm speaking to many people who are well acquainted with the movement, so I don't need to elaborate on its evolution at length, But suffice it to say that humanitarian disarmament is a people-centered approach that conceptualizes disarmament as something that's important, not just from the perspective of national security, but as a reflection of the immeasurable damage that armed conflict has caused to society. To gauge a state's commitment to humanitarian disarmament principles, our report looked at whether states have signed and ratified key disarmament treaties. And in areas where treaties do not exist, we looked at whether states have made public calls for the bannings of these weapons and practices. As you can see, 0 is the lowest score, while 4.5 is the highest score. Here we have the results. Comparing states' investment in national militaries to their commitment to humanitarian disarmament, we can see that there is a significant relationship. While the two are not perfectly proportional, it is true that states that are the most militarized in the world are also among the least committed to humanitarian disarmament. The US and China, for example, are by far the highest military spenders, and they achieve 0 and 1.25 respectively on the scale. On the other hand, Mexico is the 29th highest military spender, and although this is still a very significant sum, its lower spending relative to other states is reflected in its score of 4.5 on our scale. There's a lot to be gleaned from looking at spending figures, white papers, and states' commitment to humanitarian disarmament. Based on our data, our report put forward 3 observations about how patterns of military spending fit into the larger disarmament picture. Firstly, and fundamentally, states are clearly more invested in military expenditure than humanitarian disarmament. Beyond this, we can divide up this trend into 2 types of behavior. First, we have countries that are on the higher end of the scale in terms of spending and demonstrate low commitment to humanitarian disarmament. Their focus tends to be on traditional rather than emergent security threats, like public health and the environment. The other group's behavior is more nuanced. They are reasonably strong advocates for disarmament at multilateral fora, but this is not reflected at a more fundamental fiscal level. These states have somewhat high humanitarian disarmament scores, but also have high enough military spending to justify their inclusion in this report. Both behaviors are highly problematic, and this is elaborated in more detail in the report. But I'll move on to our second observation, which is that states use non-military threats to justify military spending. States refer to terrorism, crime, the environment, public health, migration, and economy in their white papers. But if you think back through these threats I've just mentioned, military solutions are probably not the first thing that spring to mind. You might think instead of policing, hospitals, and other types of public spending as the solution. Looking at climate change, for example, it is difficult to see how environmental concerns should trigger military spending when arms and weapons cause so much environmental damage. Moreover, I'll ask you all to cast your minds back to the statistics I referenced earlier. 0.6% of the amount spent by these 30 countries in a decade would put the infrastructure in place to adapt to climate change in developing countries. But instead, this money is being put to use in a way that's environmentally damaging in itself. The final observation is one that has been made by many, including the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. By engaging in weapons accumulation because others are doing the same, states are making the world and their own citizens less safe overall. States which increase their military spending to match other states engage in a cycle of insecurity which spurs mistrust between states. This mistrust can lead to miscommunication and accidents, and military spending, which is labeled as defensive, ends up being offensive. Our report recommendations are aimed at states and policymakers themselves. We suggest non-military ways to resolve the problems they articulate in their white papers. We also encourage accession to key treaties, in particular, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. No one is safe as long as nuclear weapons exist. In a sentence, we recommend that states urgently reconsider the proportion of state funding which is spent on the military and divert funding to meet human need through multilateral frameworks. That concludes my presentation today. I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A section, which I hope will be very solutions oriented, and looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists. Thank you very much for listening today.
Now, thank you very much, Roisin. I think it was an excellent presentation. Also very interesting, this indicator for the countries. A very good idea, very inspiring. So I think now we need to go to the next speaker. That in our list should be in the time that we are still waiting for San Perlo. That was the first one in the line. We have Emily Rubino. Emily, please, you want to come here, and we put the camera and we will fix it in a way that can work better. So now we do like that. That's like that the people at home can see you. Emily is the Executive Director of Peace Action in New York, having helped build the organization base of activists, organizing advocacy campaigns, and setting up congressional meetings. She is co-chair of the World Conference Youth Assembly of the IPB Council of the Youth Assembly, and she's IPB Council member and board member of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security in US. And Rubino is dedicated to intersectional activism that recognizes the connections between domestic social justice struggles and international human rights struggles. And we're very happy to having her here after talking to her many times by Zoom the last month, years. So thank you, Emily, and the floor is yours. You have a presentation?
I don't. So I apologize, everyone.
No.
It might have been helpful to have one, but you'll just have to listen to me speak. And I feel like the numbers are large enough that you will get the sense very quickly of the scale that we're talking about. So thanks again, everyone, for joining this session. I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone here at all when I say that the US has by far the largest military budget in the world. It's more than the next 10 countries combined. And you probably could have seen that also on the chart that my co-panelist just shared with you. So just this summer, our House of Representatives passed a $778 billion Pentagon budget in the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA as we call it. And that's $38 billion higher than Trump's final budget and $24 billion higher than the amount requested by President Biden. The National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, is seen as a must-pass bill, and it passes both chambers of Congress every year with very little dissent. Almost every other issue in our Congress is extremely divided along bipartisan lines, but when it comes to the military, there's almost no hesitation and very little dissent. Even simple things like raising the debt ceiling, which has traditionally been non-controversial, are now being used as political tools. But the military budget seems to be exempt from this, with a few notable people who vote against it every year. So our military spending makes up over half of our discretionary budget. According to the National Priorities Project, which is a really great organization that leads important research on our federal budget, approximately 24 cents of every income tax dollar in 2019 went to the military, and about half of that went directly to military contractors. According to the Poor People's Campaign, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar goes to military spending, and only 15 cents is spent on anti-poverty programs. And yet we continue to debate whether President Biden's plan to spend $3.5 trillion over the next 10 years to expand healthcare, education, childcare support, and help address the climate crisis and invest in infrastructure is too much money to be spending. For context, if you divide $3.5 trillion over 10 years, that's $350 billion a year, or less than half of what is annually approved for our Pentagon budget. There's such a hypocrisy in the regular questioning of how are you going to pay for that when it comes to programs that would benefit the people of the United States, but complete silence when it comes to the billions and trillions of dollars that we spend on so-called defense. Our enormous military budget, as you all know, did not keep us anyone safer through the pandemic, and it didn't provide any funds to address the true pressing security issues of our time, which are climate change, rising inequality, and this global pandemic. So as activists in the United States, we have our work cut out for us to address this colossal military budget and the attitude that military spending is a no-brainer, must-pass kind of thing. But in working on cutting the military budget, we also have the advantage of uniting all of the different important movement works happening in the United States, whose campaigns and goals and visions all align. None of us can achieve the future that we want without working together to defund the military. Beyond the unconscionable amount of funds going to our military, I think it's also important to point out that the US military is the world's #1 polluter. Our rampant militarism is directly responsible for the devastation and destruction of the world, not just directly through our military presence and bombs and weapons that we manufacture, use, and sell, but the fuel we use and burn and the money that we could be using to meet the material needs of our people in our country and around the world. In the United States and in New York State specifically, where my work is focused, there are various efforts and campaigns to work on this. We work on federal legislation, local and city level legislation, and broadly across the grassroots network to try to raise awareness of and take action on cutting the military budget. We're part of a coalition of groups that takes actions every year around GCOMS, or the Global Days Against Military Spending, which also coincides with Tax Day events in the US that protests every year to draw attention to where our tax money is going and what it could be used for instead. So that 24 cents I was saying of every income tax dollar could be used for things that people actually want their tax money to go to. So this past year, there were both events on traditional tax day in the US, which is April 15th, and on the new tax deadline because of the pandemic, which was May 17th. There were webinars and online events, and also a lot of in-person demonstrations, masked and distanced outside of some of the IRS or International Revenue Service buildings in the US, in cities like New York and Washington, DC. We also lobby our members of Congress around appropriation season, which is kind of this time of year, starts late summer into fall, which is when all the budgets are passed and put together. And we ask them to support cuts to the Pentagon budget through specific amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act and to oppose the final passage of the bill if those top cuts are not included. So the past 2 years, there's been an amendment to cut 10% of the top line Pentagon budget. And though it has not passed, it's been a really good opportunity to meet with our representatives and educate our elected officials on the military budget and what that money is going towards. There's always a concern that opposing the military budget is seen as unpatriotic or not supporting our troops. But in reality, the vast majority of the money is not going towards troop salaries and benefits, it's going towards weapons programs and war manufacturers. So this past year, 86 representatives out of 431 members voted in favor of that amendment, which is actually less than it was last year, because last year when it was Trump's budget, it was easier to convince Democratic members to vote for this cut and to oppose the final budget. But this year, even though the budget is higher, because it is a Democratic president, more members felt uncomfortable supporting it. So that's what we're dealing with here in the US. We're also part of a coalition in New York City that has worked with city council members to introduce a Move the Money resolution that calls on the federal government and its legislators to move significant funds away from the military budget to fund human needs and services, and that requests that in-depth public hearings are conducted on the dollar amounts that the city needs that get diverted to the Pentagon. The New York City Move the Money group has strategized to have members show up at local New York City events and protests to raise awareness of the resolution, and has also used tactics like bird dogging, or basically like showing up wherever your council member is and trying to convince them to respond and support this resolution. We also partner with and support the Poor People's Campaign, as I mentioned before, which is officially called the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And they're a group that's continuing the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and many others who called for a revolution of values in America. They're focused on ending the interlocking injustices of systematic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, and the war economy / militarism, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. They engage in mass civil disobedience and are also working to continue to build the collective power of the poor and disenfranchised people in the United States. They've developed their own Poor People's Moral Budget, which identifies over $350 billion in annual military spending cuts that would make the nation and the world more secure, and $886 billion in estimated annual revenue from fair taxes on the wealthy, corporations and Wall Street, and billions more in savings from ending mass incarceration, addressing climate change, and meeting other campaign demands. All budgets are moral documents that reflect the priorities of a nation, and the Poor People's Campaign is showing a clear alternative to our federal budget. I think it's also important to draw connections between our rampant militarism abroad and obsession with military spending to the state-sanctioned violence happening domestically in the US with our police forces. Not only are they similar in that the police budgets in the US are disproportionate amounts of local municipal budgets. The New York Police Department budget is the third largest budget item in the overall city budget, and it makes up about 11% of the city budget. But police forces in the United States are also directly linked to the military in the use of surplus military equipment they're able to obtain through the Pentagon 1033 program, which is basically a program where when the Pentagon gets too much equipment that they don't need, police departments can just request it for funds. So like random police departments can have tanks and other military grade equipment just because it's there and like already paid for, and like, why not? Not sure what they need it for, but it's a really unbelievable program. And yeah, I think they're also similar in that they're both seen as necessary for security, when in reality they make us less safe. The New York Police Department budget is over $6 billion, which if it was a country, would make it the 34th highest military spender in the world, according to last year's SIPRI report. In the uprisings following the police murder of George Floyd that took place in 2020, calls to defund the police started to circulate. And activists across the country demanded that police forces be defunded so that the money could be reallocated to other areas like housing or education. Even though New York City technically cut $1 billion from the New York Police Department budget, it was done in such an opaque way that many feel like the funds were just kind of shifted around instead of substantive changes and funds being taken away from the police force. In fact, many police budgets actually increased in the past year, despite claims from right-wing white supremacist groups in the United States that the police have been defunded. So the United States was founded on colonialism, racism, imperialism, and genocide. It's not a surprise that our current federal budgets continue to enable and encourage these values through our rampant military spending. So if we want to build our future and a future that is peaceful, just, and sustainable for everyone, we must continue to work to defund our military and focus on transforming our war economy into a peace economy. We must work to build international solidarity and intersectional movements, like we're doing here at this conference, to make clear that the military spending and weapons do not make anyone more safe. We must continue to work to move the money and redefine our priorities to suit the people, not the Pentagon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Emily. It's nice and it shows a bit of hope, seeing the people in US fighting also against military spending. So that's the place where we need to fight more. Thank you a lot. So our next speaker is Leticia Sedou. She, besides what I'm going to say, she's our woman in Brussels, and she's lobbying I'm fighting in between the military complex in Brussels that they are lobbying for their business. So she's doing the opposite, and we do it all together, different organizations in the European Network Against Arms Trade, where she's the program officer, and she runs the campaign No European Union Money for Arms. targeting the European Defence Fund and the inclusion of military research and development in the European budget. Leticia is an experienced advocate focusing on threats to peace and security, and particularly the diversion of civilian funds to the military domain. Previous to her work at ENAAT, she worked for 8 years at the Organization Mundial contra la Tortura, the World Organization Against Torture. And we're looking for the presentation here. And also, she's going to say to tell you that, but I can tell you in advance, we have some books there that we brought from Brussels about the militarization of the European Union. Some of us, we have had the opportunity to contribute to it. And I can say that it's really a really good book, not because we made it, but it's really good book and clear explaining the militarization of the European Union that Laetitia is going to present here. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jordi, for all the organization about this event. So indeed, I'll be trying to briefly present or summarize what is happening with EU militarization, but in the booklets you can have a bit more time to digest everything and see what's going on from the country policies to the political dimension of it. So maybe the first point is that it's important also to say that it's not so obvious that there is a new militarization. I mean, it's important to explain what we mean with that. We are regularly discredited as, okay, that's a kind of ideological stance. And the fact that it is, in fact, based on very concrete policies and elements. So I know that what is usually most commonly known or heard in the media is about the possibility of having an EU army. That's still quite far away. It may happen, it may not, but this is not what is happening today. There are many other things that are much less known, which are much more worrying, I would say. Not saying that an EU army would be good, but we are not there yet. So the important thing is then, can go to the next one. Can I do it? Yeah. The important thing to see is that what is EU military, what is militarization? And mainly it's important to see that I will try and explain how some EU policies are giving a military character to the EU, are answering military needs, are meant to equip or train with military means, which in fact means prepare for war or future wars. And of course, the last step of militarization is about possible occupation or put under military control. Now, the most important thing that happens and the most kind of very straightforward and critical thing was the fact that the EU, with the EU common budget, started to fund military research to produce or enhance weaponry. This was really breaking the taboo, breaking a red line at EU level, that the EU budget should never be used for military purposes. Until then, everything which was military was funded by the member states, putting some extra money in a special pot, but not with a common EU budget. So that's something really has been really opening the way to the military. It's very important, and a very important moment. And as you could see, in less than a decade, the amount spent started with a very low preparatory programs, so pilot programs. And from this year to the next 7 years, we jumped to 8 billion of money given to the industry or private sector research to research and develop and weaponry or enhance existing weaponry. So this is something which also did not come from the blue. It also happened because there was a strong lobbying from the arms industry, of course, in order to get access to those EU funding. The arms industry did so for long already. And not entering into the details, but just to see that prior to get money for military purposes directly, they managed to get quite a lot of funding for security research. So that's since 2007, how much money had been slowly but surely increasing for the arms and security industry, in particular for research, for civil security, and now, as I said, for military spending. So this was really a kind of long trends where, as Jordi says, they have strong means to influence EU policies with a plan and a strategy for 20 years that we have, of course, much limited means to do. So what are the objectives of the EU Defense Fund very concretely? Well, as I said, it's about answering military needs first. So we have the EDF, the EU Defense Fund, but also other policies, which I'm not going into the details, you have that in the booklet, but you have another program which is called PESCO, Structured Cooperation, where member states, this time they fund it themselves, their connections, do also research and development for new or enhanced military equipment. The idea is to equip EU countries. So it's not about equipping now a new army, we don't have it, but it's equip national armies, but not only arming them, but also exporting or providing material for interventions abroad. France could make an intervention with EU-funded weaponry. And of course, the exports, and we will talk about that more tomorrow with a special workshop on this, but that's also a very worrying push factor to fund the industry to build new weaponry that they will in the end be exporting. The idea is to prepare for future wars, because there is an important focus in this funding for research about the new weapons to come, autonomous weapons, the use of artificial intelligence in the weaponry, disruptive technologies, the use of space for military purposes. So this is also the way to prepare the future of wars, which is very worrying. Now, it's not only about us, about equipping the EU. Another very worrying trend is that part of the EU external aid and a new program called Peace Facility will also allow to provide military training and equipment to third countries, to partner countries, typically Mali, under the argument that you can't have development without security. So they have reverted the argument, and now the idea is security first, so that at some point one day there might be some development. And that's also very worrying how they divert the logic of the EU towards a military approach. So of course, all this means in the end will be used. As I said, they will be used for national interventions possibly, but they can also be used for EU missions. So in a more or less near future, those equipment that will be developed will be used one way or another for military interventions. So that's a bit the last step of this militarization, occupy military. Now, I've spoken a lot about the material preparation for war with the development of those equipments, but that's not the only trend, unfortunately. What is, I would not say even more worrying, but an extra concern we have is the fact that now the new step and the new trend at EU level is to find how each and every civil policy, civilian program should one way or another help the war effort, to say so, or should help the defense purposes of the EU. So that's what they call the synergies between civil and military. I won't go through the details of all those programs, but I wanted to show you how each and every program, from transport with here marked 1.7 billion budget for military mobility in the EU, to even environment programs that can be used by the arms industry to develop green weapons that would be less polluting, if possible. Social fund, regional fund, education programs, because the arms industry is facing a lack of skills. They have difficulties to attract young skilled workers to their area. So they are really having a global strategy in support of the arms industry. The space policy, of course, they have been developed as civilian programs, but now the idea is, okay, how can we use that now for military purposes? So, yeah, come to the next one. So we've talked a lot about the material preparation and all these different aspects, and then coming to a conclusion, the idea is that militarization is not only about this material preparation of war, but there is also first a cultural and symbolic dimension in the militarization of minds, I would say, if I can say so. And there, of course, the two legs they are using, which are very worrying and very difficult to fight against, are the narratives behind. You have the securitization narrative, of course, to claim that Europe is under threat and that citizens are expecting the EU to protect them. And that gives, of course, They try to get their legitimation that citizens are asking them to do these kind of policies. While in the truth is that in the media, nobody really knows what this militarization means. And I'm not sure that knowing that precisely, citizens would really agree with it. So there is all this fear speech behind it. There is also the economic narrative about the fact that those policies would save the European economy, that this is good for jobs and growth, that there will be cost reduction and savings. They are all wrong, and you have all the details in the booklet. I would just insist, because that's the topic today, that all this money from the EU is coming on top of national spending. It's not replacing. It's not a way to spend less with the same research. No, it's on top of it. And the EU itself is pushing member states to continue spending even more into defense. So there is absolutely no savings at all. And from a symbolic point of view, the EU leaders are really presenting this as an important historical step, a new consensus for Europe, a new project that would save Europe in front of the growing Euroscepticism. So we see that we have all the elements of militarization without it. And I think maybe the last one, which I may have missed, was about the intentional process. Yeah, it's there. The intentional process also is important. That's the last element. This does not come by accident. This was initiated by member states through the Council or the Commission. It was agreed by the Council, by the Parliament, who voted in majority several times in favor of these policies, despite all the work we tried to do as civil society to alert them about the risks. And there is a clear intention behind, in the end, which is to defend the European position in the world and so said Euro-Western position and domination in the world behind. Access to raw material, all the elements you can see are there. And just to conclude then, the idea, of course, that it's not only a problem per se for moral reasons or because it goes against the EU law. It's a problem because of the impact on peace and safety. The first one being, as I mentioned already, to exacerbate the global arms race. And we know that in turn, this global arms race feeds conflict, feeds violence, and of course, diverts resources from basic needs. Not only in Europe, it's diverting resources in Europe, but also in the third countries, be it by the destructions, be it by their own countries buying those weapons instead of investing. So it's really having a global impact on peace and safety, both in Europe and outside. And the last point, which I will make, is that another claim by the EU is to say that in order to strengthen the EU so-called soft power, diplomacy, negotiation, they need to have a hard power to be credible. That's again something which has been demonstrated of being false, being not true. And again, I will back to the booklet because I don't want to enter into the details, but there is literature to show how much this contradicts your role. If you appear as coming with force, coming with military means, then your dialogue, your diplomacy, everything appears not legitimate or appears biased. So that's a complete also wrong aspect. And that's very problematic because so far, more or less, I would say, the EU could appear as a rather neutral actor when acting as EU on the international scene. So this militarization will definitely challenge this perception and behavior, yeah, making the global situation, I think, even worse. So thank you very much. And
all right, thank you. And we stop sharing. Just to see, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you a lot to Laetitia. I think it's also very interesting to see the European Union is trying to be also an actor on military, at least on having a really high military budget. And we need to pay attention to that. It's happening without knowing. Now we have here in the room, Sam Perlo was the first one in the list, but don't worry, we can manage. We manage. I'm waiting for you. So I think we can go back to the presentation of Sam Perlo. Then we have Jürgen Grasslin, and we'll have Pere Ortega to finish. So we have 3 more presentations, and we have Sam, from UK, Jürgen from Germany, Pere from Spain. So we have 3 different perspectives that are helping us to understand the topic. So Perlo, you can come here, and I introduced you. She will prepare your presentation, Liat. So Perlo is a research coordinator at Campaign Against Arms Trade in London. She's focusing in the UK military spending and procurement and the role of the arms industries in filling conflict. He's also a fellow of the World Peace Foundation and senior associate researcher at CIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, where we have worked for a long time, working on military expenditure, arms industry, and arms trade. So Sam, thanks a lot for coming to Barcelona, and the floor is yours.
Yes, so let's start on that slide. Oh, okay.
You want to be stand up like that?
Okay, yeah, yes, please, yes. Okay. Oh, I see. It's not being shared, right? Yes. Well, while you're getting that set up, I'll say thanks very much for inviting me. So very sorry to be late and to have missed the earlier excellent presentations. It was my CAAT board meeting, which should have finished in time to get me here, but for very necessary reasons overran by a lot. But anyway, here I am. I see that the it's showing here. We're still trying to get it on Zoom.
Yeah, because it's different formats.
Sorry, yeah, because it's in PowerPoint and it seems that it's not. No, like that. So we can show that one. All right.
Is this working now?
No, perfect. It's not here, but it's there.
Right. Okay, so I can go ahead. Yes. So, yes, I'm going to talk about trends in world military expenditure over the past few years and what's been driving them. I used to do this for a living at CIPRI, producing the data on military expenditure and presenting it. I'm still involved with them. I was consulting with them on the details of estimates for some countries, but now I'm presenting it as an outsider using the CIPRI data like all the other data users. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So the headline figure is that the total for world military expenditure in 2020 was a record as recorded by CIPRI, very near to $2 trillion, 1,981 billion. If you consider all the various countries for which even estimates cannot be included, and the fact that we know that there's off-budget spending that's not counted, then we can be sure that the actual total of world military spending, based on CIPRI's definition, would be considerably clearly over $2 trillion. It's a huge amount. It is going up. It was an increase of 2.6% in real terms compared to 2019. And it's 9.5% higher than 2011 over the decade. It represents 2.6% of GDP, which is lower than it was during the Cold War of global GDP, but it's higher than it was than it has been for quite a number of years. This is partly because global GDP climbed in 2020 due to COVID, while military spending continued to increase. Along with, it must be said, a lot of other areas of spending as governments put in stimulus packages and replacement spending, employment support in the face of the pandemic. But it is going up, and all the top 5 spenders in 2020 increased their level of spending, starting with the US, 778 billion, just over 3 times as high as what CIPRI estimates Chinese military spending to be. See, we've lost the presentation again. Are we okay here? Yeah, okay, right. And then after China, again, a huge gap down to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of India, Russia, and the United Kingdom, but all of them increasing their level of spending. If we go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is showing a longer term graph of military spending since 2000. 2000, the late 90s, was pretty close to the bottom of the trend of world military spending, which fell quite a lot after the end of the Cold War, especially because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russian spending and the other successor states was a fraction of what Soviet spending had been, but also military spending fell in the West and in some other countries as a result of what were some very briefly hopes for a more peaceful world after the end of the Cold War. Of course, that was on the eve of 9/11 and all the US-led wars that followed 9/11, and which saw military spending soar, led by the US, but very strongly followed by China, Russia, and countries across the world, following this trend to the idea that you solve problems with military power. There was a very slight dip after 2011 as the after effects of the global financial crisis began to kick in. Initially, there was stimulus spending. Then you started to see austerity in Western Europe, the Budget Control Act in the US. Other countries were still increasing, but world total, very slight drop, nothing compared to the drops at the end of the Cold War, for example. And it quite quickly started increasing again after 2014 as the geopolitical situation worsened and countries once again decided that more military power was needed to face these issues. So go on, next slide, please. So breaking it down regionally, and what I'm comparing with now in particular is the picture since 2014, when a lot happened. There was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea. There was lots going on in the Middle East, of course, with the war against ISIS, the ISIS takeover of much of Iraq and Syria, and then the response, the Western response to that. And of course, NATO's response to what happened in Ukraine, the new commitment to higher military spending, both by the US and by European countries. So in North America, we've seen quite a large increase there. That's the US and Canada, so almost all of that is the US. Very little increase or even slight decreases in Latin America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Surprisingly, that's Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and a few others. It's a sort of tale of two halves there. Russia increased spending massively for a few years, but then economic realities kicked in and they cut it again subsequently. So overall, we're seeing very little increase. Huge increases in Asia Pacific region, led by China, but again followed by everyone else. And China is in many ways following a US lead there as the other major player in the Asia Pacific region. And likewise, India, Pakistan, countries in Central and South Asia have also shown very strong increases. We don't know what's happening in the Middle East. We've got there's a figure for 2014 But since then, there has been no data for the UAE. It's one of the biggest spenders in the region. They just have not produced any usable official figures. No data for Qatar. They never produced any figures anyway, but that's continued. No figures for Syria in the middle of its civil war, no figures for Yemen in the middle of its civil war. And so SIPRI has, we decided after that, there is not enough information even to publish a sort of estimate for the region because there is too much missing data. There's an estimate for the world total, but not specifically for the Middle East. If we can move on. And here's continuing that list of the top spenders, a list of the top 10 and how they changed since 2011 shares of GDP. Saudi Arabia, one of the highest shares of GDP for the military in the world, 8.4%. Surprisingly, the US is still lower than its peak just before the Budget Control Act kicked in, but they are increasing in real terms, but they are increasing rapidly. They'll probably overtake that level before long if they continue the current way. Huge increase by China, though that slowed down as their economic growth slowed as well. But as you can see, in most cases, it's a clear increasing trend, and even where we've got negative figures there, that was the result of the first few years of the economic crisis, and now that's turning in the other direction. Germany, which did have fairly low and flat spending, relatively speaking, as a share of GDP, now following NATO's decisions is increasing. So I'll move on to the last slide, which is talking about what is behind all of this. And one of the big factors, especially since 2014, is the return fully of superpower competition on two fronts between the US and China. Who is going to be the regional top dog in the Western position? The US seeking to maintain its position of military dominance, China seeking to supplant the US as in that role as the regional hegemon, throwing its weight around. Other countries in the region caught in the middle, some of them trying to make nice to China as their biggest economic partner, others seeing US imperialism as a lesser evil than the more immediate neighborly threat of Chinese sub-imperialism nearby. And a lot of them increasing military spending as well. The other big front of that is the confrontation between NATO and Russia following the events in Ukraine in 2014. NATO renewed its commitment and strengthened its commitment to this arbitrary minimum of 2% of GDP military spending. And it seems that a lot of countries, even if they're not getting to 2%, are actually quite rapidly, like Germany, moving in that direction. And this idea that the only reaction to Russian actions in Ukraine is more military power, more confrontation, new Cold War seems to be virtually unchallenged, apart from by ENAAT and others, but in mainstream policy circles, there's very little questioning that approach. And also tensions between India and China on the one hand, and India and Pakistan on the other, also driving spending in that region. So a sort of chain reaction of countries following each other in this global arms race. And as I said, generally a focus on seeking so-called solutions by military means to political problems across the world. We can see it in Yemen, where's the brutal Saudi-led intervention in response to the Houthi takeover, supported, albeit with a few more uncertainties now, by the West. In Syria, where both Syria's allies and the West have sought military solutions to the uprising there. I want to mention West Africa, and this fits in with what Laetitia was telling us about EU military aid to conflict situations. lot of activities by armed groups in West Africa, Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and heavily militarized responses supported by Western military aid, despite the fact that the militaries themselves there are corrupt and predatory and are fueling the very grievances that drive people into the arms of these armed groups. And again, the EU peace facility seems to have this idea that if we build up security forces in these countries, there'll be more security, without asking whether those security forces are actually providing security or the opposite. An anecdote in relation to that, in Guinea a few months ago, the US was giving a training course to the military. You know, both the hard skills and the soft skills, government and everything like that. Except the soldiers slipped off. They slipped out from a training session early when it was not finished from the US instructors. They slipped off because they needed to conduct a military coup. And so that's how successful US military assistance was. And Europe seems to be going down the same route. The spending in West Africa is a sort of drop in the global bucket, but it's some very large percentage increases. And it's just indicative of this militaristic approach to the political problems of the world that reflect what the great powers are doing. The only thing that's been restraining military spending in some parts of the world has been economic issues. The collapse due to COVID, collapse in oil prices in some recent years means that Russia and some Middle Eastern countries haven't increased as much as they otherwise would have. So I will finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. They say that we had the overview in the middle, not the beginning. But anyway, now we have more inputs to understand better the other presentations. We have two speakers to finish the first part of the workshop. And now we are jumping to Jürgen Grasslin. Please, Jürgen, you can come here. Jürgen is the founder and coordinator of the Global Net and the co-founder of numerous disarmament initiatives, including the Outcry campaign to stop the arms trade, a support circle of 16 peace organizations, and is a long-standing federal spokesperson of the German Peace Society, United War Opponents, and as the chairman of the Arms Information Center, Grasslin has been actively advocating for steps towards disarmament. He's author of several publications. He has written in a large number of critical books on arms exports, as well as military and economic policy, and he has a long history of some legal victories on criminal complaints against the arms trade. And we know him since a long time ago, and he's, we can say, besides all that, a good friend and a good collaborator of the peace movement. And we really thank him to be here with us. So, Jürgen, we should have your presentation here.
Oh, it's okay. Shall I sit in the middle or shall I be here?
Can we share his presentation? Let's see if it works, because we had some problems to have the presentation online. Do you have Zoom there?
I have the same presentation here.
I have Zoom. Are you connected by Zoom?
No.
By Yasar?
No,
so maybe we can do it. Is there?
No.
Okay, so we are fixing the point to share the presentation online. Okay.
I think I start. First of all, no.
Okay. I think you can start, and here we try to fix the the presentation, no, because maybe the first one is.
Yeah. Many thanks to you all here in the room with hybrid. Many thanks to Jody and Kiki and the team of GCOMS for their work, fantastic work, and many thanks to IPB for invitation. I'm talking now about not only the world situation, because my speakers before have done. So I will have a little view on the German situation. What for me interesting is the experience that the more money is spent in military, the more money is here for arms exports. There's a narrow relationship. I hope the pictures will come afterwards. So if the military spending is rising, the arms exports is rising too. And the following of these arms exports are deadly all around the world.
Presentation is there.
Oh,
you want to use it.
Okay.
It's there and now it's there. You can see it here.
Oh, wonderful. I see.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
Good. You see, you know the data from before, from Sam and others. In the year 2000, and you remember 2001, 9/11, the terror attacks, the military spending was rising and rising and rising again. So what you can say is, if you go, can you click 2 slides again? Stop. The military budget in Germany is rising too. It's rising in, what can you say, in a dramatical way. Some years before, we have had military spending in the defense budget called Section 14 from about 35 billion euro. This year is 46 billion euro. So it's a terrible, dramatically rising spending money in the military. Next slide, please, is what you see here is, you can compare it to the major arms exports. CIPRI in Stockholm only have a look on the major arms, means tanks or means aeroplanes or battleships. The same situation. Have a look on the year 2001 and you see before the military spending and the arms exports were sinking. We have like a little hope for a peace period. But then the terror attacks from New York and Washington came, 9/11 came, and the arms exports are rising too. So who are the biggest arms exporters in the world? We have 5 arms exporters. On top is Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. 4 of the 5 are American companies. The only one, Sam knows it very well, is in United Kingdom is the BAE Systems and the British Aerospace. So they are exporting all around the world in a terrible way. So what is the topical situation? We have 3 countries who have growing exports, arms exports. It's United States with 15%, it's Germany with 21%, and it's France with 44%. What a terrible development. And other than the opinion is all around the world. The Chinese and China and Russia sank their exports. You see, usually they are the enemies of the West. Say, oh, how terrible it is in China and Russia, but it isn't at that time. What is exported? 2 examples or 3 examples. One is the Eurofighter Typhoon. Typhoon stands for exports. And in the middle of these airplanes, you see Royal Saudi Air Force. It's an export of 72 Eurofighters to Saudi Arabia, and they are used in the Yemen war. The next example is the Leopard 2 main battle tank from Germany. They are exported more than 4,000 all around the world. Leopard 1 and Leopard 2. They are given, hundreds of them are given to Turkey, and Turkey is using these tanks in North Syria against the Kurds, and they killed a lot of Kurds there with these weapons. We have a development in Germany, which is not really surprising, but it's obvious that the companies are leaving Germany because they say restrictions are now so strong in Germany. We don't want to have restrictions, so they go to South Africa or they go to Italy. They went to Italy, and RBM Italia, means Rheinmetall, produced bombs, and these bombs were exported to Saudi Arabia and used in the Yemen war. We can say it because we find some bombs. Our human rights companions find the bombs and gave the information to us in Europe. And the second fact is we have Rheinmetall in relationship to the South African company Denel. Rheinmetall has 51% of the shares and decides. And so if you produce now an ammunition plant, then you can produce it in South Africa and can export it to all around the world without restrictions. You have no German restrictions, you have no European restrictions, you have no restrictions, because South Africa, some says, welcomes. This brings more employees and more money to South Africa, and then we export. What is development in the share prices? In the last years, it was a terrible development in our side of the peace movement. So you have the civil shares, see the black ones, and we have the shares in aerospace and defense, and it's exploding in the last year. We find a lot of examples like this. For example, here, Hunting Ingalls 15% more, General Dynamics 14%, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and so on. They all get more money by producing weapons and by exporting weapons. That is not a good development. And have a short view in the future, and I think Laetitia knows it very well because it's a European project. It's the AFCAS. You cannot say combat airplane because it's not an airplane. It's a total system of an airplane, of drone, of satellites. And there are the first estimates is that the project will cost about military spending 300 billion euro. Only this project, yeah, and there are tank projects and ships projects and so on. So see what happens. My view in this second part of the lecture is what can we do against these development? Sorry, here. What we have done in Germany is to unite a lot of peace movement organizations. Altogether, Action Outcry, Stop the Arms Trade is a campaign of 150 organizations now. We are 10 years old and growing and growing and growing. That's wonderful. So every year on the 26th of February, we make an action in front of the Bundestag. You see is one. That's a good campaign because we make a lot of pressure on politics. I will show you afterwards again. There's a second good campaign. It's called Abrüsten statt Aufrüsten, means disarmament instead of rearmament. It's a campaign inspired by the labor union. And there are a lot of different organizations. It's not the classical campaign we make in the peace movement, only peace movement and human rights organizations like this. It's with doctors from hospitals, and it's teachers from schools and teacher unions and so on. So a very good campaign. We see 180,000 people signed this appeal, and it's an ongoing number. So we are growing and growing, making protesting here in Berlin and so on. We have the German Peace Society, which is related to the War Resistance International, working together, and our aim is to not only to stop arms producing, not only to stop weapons exports, is we don't need an army, we don't need the Bundeswehr, and we don't need arms industry. So it's maybe a radical pacifist position, but it's a good one because we have a lot of people working with us and say it's enough, we don't need the money for military spending. It's a good campaign. We in the Arms Information Center in Freiburg, in the southwest of Germany, we are researching what happens if the weapons are delivered to other continents, to other countries. Sorry for this picture. I can show you hundreds of pictures like this, because we are researching in the countries what happens when the weapon came there, what happens there. You said before, Jordi, that we are very successful. We have the most successful year now with 2021, because in the federal court, in the most important court in Germany, we won 2 times against companies. This is the first time in the history of the peace movement. The first was our criminal charges against Heckler & Koch. Heckler & Koch is #1 with small arms in Europe. Is the most deadliest company in Europe. We have more than 2 million people killed in the history of this company by Heckler & Koch weapons all around the world, not only delivering from Oberndorf am Neckar, where the company is situated, also by license productions. There are like 15 license productions all around the world. And they delivered, there was a whistleblower, they delivered more than 4,000 rifles, assault rifles of the type G36 to Mexico illegally, were spread in Mexico. We made criminal charges and we were successful in front of court. That's very good. You see below, March 13, Heckler & Koch sentenced by the Federal Court of Justice. So they have to pay 3 million euros to the German state, and some of the managers are sentenced. So that's a good signal in the small arms industry, because it was the first time in the history of Heckler & Koch is sentenced because of illegal weapons exports. The second case is that we have a second company. It's called Sig Sauer. Is in northern Germany, and they exported 38,000 of pistols from Germany to United States, and from the United States to Colombia, where civil war is. It was allowed to export from Germany to United States because it's a NATO partner, but it was not allowed to deliver the weapons to Colombia. So they did, and we have a whistleblower too. And so we are not only looking on the victims, we gave the perpetrators a name and a face. Here's Ron Cohen. He is Chief Executive Officer of Sig Sauer Incorporation in the United States. And he's one of the 2 or 3 persons responsible for the illegal export. So now in July, 1st July in this year, the judgment of the Federal Supreme Court in Karlsruhe it is. Sig Sauer was sentenced now to 11 million to pay to the German state. And Ron Cohen and Michael Lücke were given suspended prison sentences. So it's a good step. And we are on a good way, because the next complaint is on the way, because we have evidence that Sig Sauer delivered again weapons to Mexico, to Colombia, and to Nicaragua. So we'll see what happens in the next years. It's very interesting what happens. We are going a new way in the German peace movement. We work together with filmmakers. This is very interesting because it's Andrew Feinstein, you know him all, but it's Wolfgang Landgräber made a lot of film in the last 30 years about Heckler & Koch. And it's Daniel Harrich. He made 2 evenings, film evenings in the ARD, which is #1 German TV. And we have 1 times 14 million, 1 times 10 millions of visitors seeing these films. So it's a new way to bring the peace movement in a broader population and a more view on the peace movement and what we are doing. I think it's a good tip to work together with filmmakers. Maybe you have been in the corruption tracker before. It's about 3 hours ago like this. We worked together with the corruption tracker with Andrew Feinstein, and they have now 41 cases of arms exports with corruption deals, with bribes like this. So it's the same thinking to say we need new ways to the same theme and new public. So it's a good ongoing. What we have done, because we have had the situation, and we have the situation not only in Germany, that the industrial companies are leaving the industrial countries and say we go to other countries to produce there where the restriction is lower. So we founded a global net Stop the Arms Trade. We are publishing in several languages our cases. For example, in Russia, French, Portuguese, and the standard language is English, and we have German, Espanol, two. The last case we published were a case in 4 parts, means there were built murderous walls all around the world. There are companies delivering weapons and bring the people to flee there because they are full of fear or people are killed. So they try to flee, but the same companies are building the walls, high-tech walls, to stop the refugees. So they are profiting double. 4 cases: Saudi Arabia, Israel and Palestine, USA and Mexico, and the last one is Maghreb, is published some days before. You know this very well. The border between Mexico and the United States, there are organizations looking for the refugees. Not every refugee survived this trip. There's an organization in Mexico looking for bones of people, skull or other bones lying there, and try to find out which people have been there, who was the refugees. In 2022, we are looking forwards with child soldiers, not the usual classes. We look which weapons the child soldiers have. Where does the weapons come from? How is it possible that children with 13, 14, 15 years are fighting with small arms from Russia or Germany or other countries? Then we now make a list at that time about, I say, about 100 cases of arms exports in the history of arms exports, beginning 100 years ago up to today and up to the Yemen war. In the case 8 will be Yemen war. And we try to go a new way by looking for peace for culture. And we do it with music, anti-protest songs. With protest songs, with peace songs, and so on. Let me say 2 sentences. One is we founded critical shareholders, like shareholders by Heckler & Koch or by Airbus. It's very, very successful. And the last one is, in preparing this session today, I was thinking about what can we do? What is our way to do? So first of all is to support the campaigns we have, GCOMS and others. One is organizations, contact organizations who people are suffering a lack of funds due to high armament budget. The third is, let us create worldwide network and not only think country and country and country, because ENAAT is going in a good way because ENAAT thinks European. So we think European too and global. And the fifth one is, how can we work together with Friday for Future? And my answer is because war is the worst form of environmental destruction. And the last is to support the sustainable goals of the United States. Number 16 is peace and justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jürgen. And now we go to the last presentation. Let me introduce you, Pere, because I know him very well, and maybe I don't say the thing that I have to say. Pere Ortega could be the main expert, is the main expert for sure in military spending and military industry in Spain. And he's the president of Centre Delàs. He's professor of conflictology in the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. He's a peace, nonviolent disarmament and conflict researcher, former president of the Catalan Federation of Peace NGOs. And his main areas of research include, besides military expenditure, also terrorism, peace, and nonviolence. And he has published dozens of reports and books. And the last one that we know is the war economy, or about the militarization of Spain. So thank you very much, Pere, being here. The translator is there. Okay, so don't worry. You want to be up to like that? Yeah. He's going to speak Spanish and we have translation.
Yes. So I'm up here. Como todos mis anteriores conferenciantes han hablado de paz negativa, quiero dar algunas pinceladas, paz positiva, pero todo ha sido en plan negativo. como acostumbramos, y mi intervención también será en paz negativa, quiero dar una pincelada también yo inicial de optimismo en paz positiva. A ver, cierto es que lo que hemos visto hasta ahora y lo que yo voy a enseñaros ahora va a dibujar un planeta cada vez más conflictivo.
So in this conference, we've been talking a lot about negative peace, but I would like now to briefly talk about or have an optimistic point of view regarding positive peace aspects.
Las relaciones internacionales empeoran, la geopolítica está peor, cada vez hay más tensión, sobre todo en el sudeste asiático, ya se ha dibujado el último pacto entre Estados Unidos, Gran Bretaña y Australia y Nueva Zelanda para presionar a la India, que será indiscutiblemente la próxima potencia económica mundial número 1, y por lo tanto hay una tensión con China se rearmará, por lo tanto el gasto militar está aumentando de forma desproporcionada, está aumentando el comercio de armas, el militarismo aumentará, por lo tanto tendremos conflictos seguros, además de los derivados del cambio climático. Este panorama es caótico.
Okay, so in the foreseeable future, things look pretty bleak. We see like tension, just political tensions, more tensions among countries. India is gaining traction, so China feels threatened. Therefore, we have this continuous escalation of tensions, and we can foresee future conflicts in the near future.
Y entonces, ¿cuál es la parte de paz positiva que yo quiero dar una pincelada? Yo hablaré de paz negativa. Pues que hay esperanza. Lo primero, la cultura de la paz cada vez se está extendiendo más en todos los movimientos sociales mundiales.
Okay, so after this bleak message, why I'm saying that I'm talking about positive peace? Mainly because there's hope. The peace movement is continuously growing and becoming stronger and stronger.
Los movimientos feministas, los movimientos ecologistas, los movimientos por derechos humanos, los de la ayuda al desarrollo, están impregnados ya de nuestro pensamiento de la paz. En el Estado español me consta y además hay pruebas evidentes. El Black Lives Matter, el Occupy of Streets o la misma Greta Thunberg nos demuestran que la paz ha impregnado ya a la mayoría de los movimientos sociales mundiales.
So yeah, we see like feminist movements, environmental movements, movements such as Black Lives Matter, that they're dealing with racial inequalities. But we see that the peace movement has integrated into all of these different movements.
Pero hay más cosas, muchas más importantes. Cada vez hay menos lucha armada para buscar la emancipación de los pueblos. La lucha armada ha desaparecido de América Latina, ya no hay grupos que reivindiquen sociedades más justas a través de las armas.
Yes. So we see a trend of less armed conflicts regarding emancipation movements. We see that these emancipation movements are seeing other forms to...
Con la excepción de Colombia. También hemos visto cómo las primaveras árabes no tomaban las armas para reivindicar sociedades más democráticas en sus países autoritarios. Fijémonos en todos los movimientos a partir de 2004 de las primaveras árabes, mal llamadas primaveras árabes, o cómo caían uno tras otro los gobiernos autocráticos que después de la caída de la URSS, a través de movimientos no armados, movimientos sociales que luchaban para derrocar movimientos autoritarios como en Serbia contra Milosevic, en Ucrania, en Georgia, en Polonia. Por lo tanto, hay menos tensiones militares. Las sociedades pretenden cambiar y hacer más justas sus propias sociedades, no ya a través de la lucha armada. Esto es muy positivo. Por lo tanto, es una victoria también nuestra.
Okay. So we see like the Arab Spring, how in the beginning all these movements tried to achieve their objectives not in an armed violence. We also saw with the end of the Soviet Union, a lot of different countries more than becoming democratic through non-violent means. therefore, we see that there's less military tension.
O sea, es un mensaje de optimismo y de esperanza de que sí que estamos cambiando las cosas. Aunque la geopolítica y la geoestrategia no nos ayudan a entender estos cambios que yo he anunciado. Y ahora, lo que ya han explicado mis compañeros, pero que yo le voy a dar una vuelta de tuerca.
Okay. So therefore, the message of optimism is that, yes, we as a peace movement, we are changing the world, although sometimes on the broad perspective, in the geopolitical perspective, we don't perceive it as such.
Aquí tenéis el gasto militar de los últimos años, en primera línea de Estados Unidos. Fijaros cómo aumenta, ya lo ha explicado Sam. Él lo ha explicado. Esto es el current, por lo tanto, el current billions. Billions que para nosotros son miles de millones. Recordarlo, pero en inglés son billions. Bueno, fijaros lo que dice el gobierno de Estados Unidos. Fijaros lo que dice el SIPRI, la segunda línea. Dice más. ¿Por qué? Porque sabe que, de alguna manera, hay partidas económicas militares que están repartidas por otros departamentos que no son el de defensa.
So yeah, and here we see like the global military expenditure, and we can see like a divergence between like what the U.S. claims that they're spending and what IPRI in this case can prove or estimate that was the actual spending, because we know that they tried to.
Pero fijaros en la tercera línea lo que dice War History, que también hace su análisis, es un grupo solvente, muy antimilitarista, muy activista, pero que incluye muchas más partidas. Fijaros que dice para el Departamento de Defensa no hay ninguno de suicidio, no hay ningún centro de estudios por la paz en el mundo que realice el gasto militar y que coincida. Nunca coincide con nadie. Aunque mirad que dice el War History, pero mirad lo que añade. Y al final, la última línea, lo que dice. Dobla el Departamento de Defensa de Estados Unidos.
Okay, so here we see that all different research done by different organizations, every one gives a different result. Why? Because there's no clear data, there's no published data by states showing the actual result. But we see that the war resistance league claims that, and they double the military spending that they claim the US does.
¿Con esto qué quiero decir? Que el SIPRI, con toda la buena voluntad del mundo, tiene que hacer el análisis de casi 200 estados de todo el mundo, toma como referencia normalmente para hacer los equiparables lo que dicen los propios estados. Pero como bien podemos ver en este caso, lo explicaré de España, muchos estados reparten el gasto militar por otros ministerios, por otros departamentos. Y por lo tanto, aunque sé que esto aquí incluye muchas partidas que podríamos algunos considerar que no son militares, como la CIA, como el FBI, como la policía, como muchas otras partidas, el hecho es que hay un gasto superior. ¿Y con esto qué quiere decir? Que si tuviéramos en cuenta que hay muchos otros estados, como en el caso de Rusia, como en el caso de China, que no dicen la verdad cuando hablan del gasto militar, por eso siempre aumenta el gasto militar tanto de Rusia como de China y de algunos otros países. Yo conozco los casos de Egipto y conozco que esconden el gasto militar. Podríamos encontrarnos que las cifras que nos dicen oficialmente el SIPRI podrían doblarse. Por lo tanto, no es el 2,6 o el 2,5% del PIB mundial. Es el 5.
Okay, so why CIPRI has such a low number compared to the War Resistance League? That's basically because CIPRI uses as a base estimate what the states claim that they spend. Then they do their research, but they start from that point of view.
Yeah.
That means that when all these states, but we know that states try to hide, or at least they subdivide their expenditure in many other like departments, and so therefore it's not officially military spending, but we can prove that it is. And that means that we could even argue that the numbers given by CIPRI could be double.
Por lo tanto, si estamos hablando de casi $2 billones que dice 2.000 millones de dólares que dice el sitio, podríamos estar quizás entre 3.000 o 4.000 millones de dólares. Sigue mi partner. Se podría ser. En el caso de Estados Unidos, claro, yo lo he analizado. Bien. Tienen mucha razón los de War History.
Okay, so therefore, these 2 billion that CIPRI estimates, we could even talk about 3 or 4 billion US dollars.
Ahora, para ir rápido, ya me paso a España, porque la segunda parte vamos a compañeros de España para que vean cómo ha ido el gasto militar en España. Aquí tenemos un gráfico que está el gasto militar del Estado español de los últimos 25 años, tanto en precios corrientes como en precios constantes. Supongo que sabéis la diferencia, ¿no? 25 años, ¿por qué? Porque en 1996 en España empezó un militarismo desaforado de la mano del Partido Popular, con un presidente que hizo una apuesta clara por el militarismo en España, lanzando grandes proyectos de armas que hoy en día no estamos hablando.
Okay, so now we'll start talking about Spain. In here we see this graph with like current military spending and constant military spending, and we can see a huge uptick in Spain because of in 1996 conservative government in Spain started investing in like huge military programs. So we can see a big uprise.
Ya se ve cómo llegó la crisis financiera del 2008 e inmediatamente el gasto militar en casi todos los países occidentales, especialmente en Estados Unidos, en España también desciende. No es una excepción, también desciende, pero pasada la crisis vuelven a aumentar. Los constantes menos, pero en corrientes mucho. Podemos estar casi al mismo nivel de el punto máximo.
Okay. So in here we can clearly see with the financial crisis, spending decreases a large amount, but once the financial crisis is done, again we go up again, and we are in the same levels as we were before the financial crisis.
Aquí tenéis en cifras España, cifras de España, 25 años, cómo hemos pasado de 10.000 millones de euros al actual 21.623, incorporando todas esas otras partidas de gasto militar que están repartidas por otros ministerios. Pero mirad, aumenta. Lo mismo en I+D, RD, como ha aumentado, no mucho, ya se gastaba mucho entonces, porque entonces empezaron los grandes proyectos de armamento, como las ventas de armas, la producción, perdón, esto es producción de armas. La producción de armas, esta es la exportación, perdón, la exportación de armas se ha multiplicado. Y eso que yo recuerdo que las grandes organizaciones estuvieron muy contentas de tener una ley de comercio de armas. Y yo les decía, sí, pero una ley de comercio de armas también puede servir para ayudar a exportar. No penséis que va a reprimir las exportaciones. Las leyes se hacen también para ayudar. Y por lo tanto, mirad cómo hemos pasado del 96 sin ley, y ahora tenemos ley, y estamos en casi 4.000 millones las exportaciones de armas. El Estado español es el séptimo exportador de armas.
So in here we see that since 1996 we've gone from 10,000 million in military spending to 21,005 million. Sorry. And we can only see how the arms trade has multiplied this figure like in a huge amount. And like in Pere said that when there was a law for like arms trade in Spain, the peace movement saw it as a positive thing. However, there was the fear that when some like a new law happens, it's not always to protect but also to promote. And as we see, this law help promote arms trade.
Y la última es la producción de armas. Nuestra industria militar en España hace 25 años producía 1.000 millones y hoy produce 7.200. La producción de armas de nuestra industria militar. Por eso somos los séptimos exportadores del mundo.
And we see the last figure was the production of weaponry, and we can see how it just increased in a large amount, and now we are the 7th country in the world that produces more weapons.
Esta semana, el lunes, presentaron los próximos presupuestos generales del Estado en el Congreso de Diputados, los del año 2022, de España. Y son, ciertamente, una vez analizados, desde mi perspectiva, unos presupuestos socialmente aceptables y los mejores que ha hecho el Estado español en los últimos 40 años. Gracias a las ayudas europeas para el desarrollo que ha lanzado las ayudas por la pandemia del COVID. Pero
okay, so this year we have the new budget for new governmental budget has been approved, and they're the most socially acceptable in the last 40 years. And the main reason is because of these new programs of the European Union to help recover from the COVID pandemic.
Pero todo es positivo. En el ámbito militar son unos presupuestos tan negativos como los anteriores del año pasado, porque este año ya tienen previsto 4 nuevos grandes programas de armamento del Estado español que se han aprobado ya en el Consejo de Ministros, que son estos 4, y que tienen un importe de 3.654 millones que se incorporan ya al presupuesto del año que viene. Por lo tanto, las inversiones en armamento en España continúan al alza de forma muy importante.
Okay. However, although this budget proposal seems really positive from the social perspective, in the military spending, we see that it also has increased. And there are 4 new large programs of armament, and therefore the trend is still going up.
Uno de ellos, no sé si os habéis fijado, es el avión ese nuevo de combate, el CAAT. España le prepara 2.500 millones. Un proyecto de armas que superará los 30.000 millones. Yo creo que ha sido un poco restringido la presentación de él. Yo creo que superará los 30.000 y puede llegar a los 50.000, porque el Eurofighter actual, que es un avión de combate europeo, ya superó los 30.000 millones. Por lo tanto, uno de futuro que se hará en 10 años superará los 50.000.
So there's a new program to develop a new fighter plane, and the figures are going to be really, really high.
Y acabo. El presupuesto del Estado español del año 2022 que acaba de presentarse en el Congreso de Diputados. Aquí tenéis el actual, 2021 y 2022. Ya veis que aumenta, no mucho, pero aumenta. La tendencia es que aumente todo, pues también el gasto militar aumentará. Pero lo más escandaloso, ¿dónde aumenta más? En las ayudas en RD, algo aumenta, o sea, más ayudas para producir nuevos armamentos, los nuevos, los que he dicho antes, los que he enseñado en la diapositiva anterior, aumentan, ya casi llegamos a los 1.000 millones, y para pagar esos grandes proyectos que ya están en marcha, se prevén, si el año pasado se pagaban casi 4.000 millones, este año pagaremos 4.000, el año que viene, 4.582 millones en inversiones en armas solo en el Estado español. Con eso, he dicho que iba a hablar de paz negativa, y esto para nosotros es negativo. No podemos poner solo el acento en lo negativo, hemos de buscar lo positivo y ya lo he dicho al principio. Y aquí os dejo. Gracias.
Okay, so we see that the military spending, it's still increasing. However, the numbers don't seem that exaggerated. The trend is still negative. But the worrisome thing is that we're investing still a lot in developing new military armament programs, new weapon programs, and we're still paying investments that we did in the previous years, and that we will be paying for the next 10 years or more. Therefore, this is the largest rise in money. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both, Pere and Mark, for the translation. So now we have around 20 minutes, a bit more, for some comments that questions that you may have, because then we have to go to the peace party. You know that after that we have a peace party all the afternoon, and it's just right there in the inside in the square that we have inside the CCB. So please, we can have. You can ask for the floor. We have one intervention there and one here. Any other? We have two. So you can start, please. Go ahead. Maybe it's better if you come for the mic. The mic is here, and at home they can listen to you better. Thank you. You want to say who you are? You don't.
My name is Nico, and for instance, I volunteer for London campaign against arms trade, so I'm well aware of Sam Perlo-Freeman's work, etc. in London. I was just curious to ask about what the potential is for law to address or resolve any of these issues with military expenditure, and especially when it comes to arms exports and production for arms trade. And now when we have an arms trade treaty, that seems completely futile in terms of addressing any of these issues. And when we have national policies and laws that seem equally futile, even though they exist. So I was curious to know, like, what do you think the potential is for law to have a role here?
Thank you. Thank you. Next one for the question. You can have some questions, and then you can decide who is answering some of these questions, and you will come here.
I'm Alex here from Society Culture Peace. I have 3 remarks or questions. Why is decreasing every time the budget? Who profit, and how we could overcome this development? The first thing is, after the Cold War, it was very serious. It was Warsaw Pact and NATO, and they said, okay, we have to build weapons because we are in a confrontation situation. And then now we have a new confrontation, Russian, I make very short, Russian and China, and then the United States and Europe, and many other countries between. You can read it every day in the newspaper. That is, they're building in our mind a confrontation situation. And this we have to start, like UNESCO said, this war starts in the head of the people. This is an implementation in all the information. How we could overcome these things. We have thousands of military bases, most of the United States, all over the world, to give the figures here. And I think what we could do, this is a message from the World Peace Conference here. I think we should make this military base not only illegal, we should make like a Woodstock there. This is a confrontation. We have health problem, everything. Why we spend so much money? Not enough for the health of the people, for the pure people, so many war. And I think one should be an action day that we go on to the military base and say, this military base should be a peace place. Last March, we will do it ourselves. I'll leave you a comment. 28th, all the churches meeting in my town. We have Africom and Oilcom in Stuttgart, in our city. We have Rammstein, and we make this action day here. 28th, 100,000 people come into town, and you can see it. Oit may also, and we propose to make the human right day for the human right to peace. We have to totally choose the confrontation in a cooperation thing. Then we overcome this military budget. There is no reason for this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so any other intervention before giving the floor again to the speakers? You can say anything that you want to share with us. Amela, come here. Also, people at home or people online, you can ask for the floor. Don't forget that.
Yeah, my name is Amela. I'm from the IPB and Ayalana, and I also want to add something to the law part, or maybe extend the question, but to the liability of companies and not only states, because most of the ATT, or even if we talk about the common position, we will hold states liable for it. And what are the means to hold the companies liable? And maybe even beyond the ATT and the common position, maybe from the human rights perspective, extending the due diligence obligation to companies, just as a thought that we can discuss. Thanks.
Thank you, Mela. Okay, anyone else? Any other intervention? We don't have much time, but we still have. Yeah, we could use still 20 minutes if this clock is okay. So then, if no one wants to speak, so you can come to answer some of these questions about the law, these cases, the law cases. Any other one? Okay, so Jürgen, go ahead.
So I give a part of the answer, and other speakers will add to the rest. First of all, our success in Germany is such huge because there were illegal weapons exports, and we made complaints and we were successful with the complaints. What is not usually has been in the past. In the past, there has been a lot of decisions by courts in spite of illegal weapons exports, pro-exports. So this changed, and now there's a new law in Germany that means if you export illegal to other countries, you have to pay not only the money you earn with, you have to pay the money of the whole deal. And that's about the reason Sig Sauer has to pay not only 3 or 4 million of euros, they have to pay 11 million of euros, and it's a good signal. Whoever exports illegal in Germany has to pay much more money than it earned with this. I think Laetitia will talk about EU common position and so on. One point I want to add is there's an ATT treaty, and we have a discussion in Germany whether it's a good treaty or not good treaty. My opinion is there was no only export from Germany was blocked by the ATT treaty. So it's not strong enough in my opinion. So let's discuss. And to go to Henning Zero, he's a very, very famous and productive activist in Germany for culture of peace. And Henning is a symbol for us and a hero for us to say, not only to think arms exports and perpetrators and victims, to go a new way to say how we get here a festival, how we can get much more people go with us and be joined with us. It's music, it's films, it's whatever you want, it's concerts. And we have had a film festival, the Global Net in Bozen, in North Italy. And a lot of people came and looked films about peace and arms exports and what we can do against this. I think that is what I mean. We have to go in new ways and to broaden our spread and our thinking and to say, let's make festivals for peace and let's make festivals against arms exports. And we join with a very famous artist in Germany. It's Konstantin Becker. Every German know him because he says he's one of our protectors of the campaign for global net music. And we are searching now singers and songwriters all around the world and the continent to support this campaign, which starts next year. So that's my small part. I think the other speakers should add. Thank you.
Okay, okay, we have a couple of questions. One question from Huba, from the people that is online. But before the question, I would like to share with the power that I have. I would like to share one case that we didn't explain here, related to the treaties and all the law that exists on arms exports. In my opinion, after working on all that, of course, is that the law that we have in Europe and the arms trade treaty is not useful to stop arms trade, to stop arms exports, because you can use it as it is written or not, and you can have a different interpretation, no? And the numbers they show that it's not working, and we knew it in the beginning. So that's a tool. But there are other ways to try to go to the court, and we start a process in the Hague, in the International Criminal Court. Different organizations. We have the CAAT, we have Delàs, we have Humanitarian Disarmament, Amnesty International, and the leader of this communication to the International Criminal Court, that is the ECCHR from Berlin. That is a group of lawyers, and we went using the international humanitarian law to try to find individual responsibilities to see who has been responsible to decide to sell weapons to a country that is in armed conflict, knowing that the country is in armed conflict, and knowing that that the international humanitarian law says that we shouldn't do that in some way, no? And the International Criminal Court, they need to decide if they accept the case or not. So they are still, let's say, with the decision, reading it, and we hope they will take it, or at least they will ask for more information to different countries to start the process of putting the attention in the civil servant from the Spanish ministry, in this case, who said, yes, we can sell weapons to Saudi Arabia and they are in war in Yemen and they use our weapons, sold them to do that, or to the people from the company. In the case of Spain, will be the manager of the Airbus company, in this case, no, that would be the idea, to say that you are responsible in some way of accepting, of deciding to sell weapons to that country that they could use it and they use it in a war. So there are other ways, but all these ways, I don't know why they don't have nothing to do with the arms trade legislation. No, there are other legislation. So we need to know. That's all. Okay, and the question from Huba, from the people online: are there significant changes in the trends of global military spending during the pandemic, 2 years in, as compared to pre-pandemic period? Who wants to answer? Are there significant changes? Sam, please.
We've not got any time at all. In 2020, most countries still increased spending. They didn't cut spending in response to the economic collapse for very good reasons. Generally, public spending, because the collapse in private sector needed to be compensated for by the government, so they needed to be putting in more spending, to support employment and health and so forth. So generally, across the board, they weren't cutting spending, and that included in the military. In subsequent years, and this was what happened after the global financial crisis, it was a couple of years before that really started kicking in terms of reductions in military spending in a lot of countries. So it may well be that a couple of years down the line, we see falls in public expenditure generally and military expenditure specifically, except the whole idea of austerity as a response to debt has been seen not to work. So it's quite likely that the pattern that we saw after the global financial crisis won't repeat itself. And in particular, there's so much pressure for higher military spending. So I don't see COVID as being very likely to lead to reductions in military spending. And if it does, it will be a couple of years down the line.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Okay, still 10 minutes. Leticia
just to explain maybe a bit this text, it's a very strange text, this common position, because it's supposed to be binding, but it's not a normal EU law, like directive or the regulations that directly have kind of legal force in a country, so that you or a company, whatever, could use this against its own country if the country does not respect this EU law. The common position is much more ambiguous. It's supposed to be binding, but the member states are themselves declaring it's binding. No one can go to justice based on the common position. So that's the limit of it. So definitely, as you say, it's not really a good tool. The text might not be that bad, but for the time being, it's not really a tool that you can use. Some countries transferred the common position into their national law. So there, according to your national law, you may be able to refer to it. But in order, the judge didn't, so the judge would not even take it into account. So it's a very tricky, difficult situation about this common position. Now, does that mean we should just throw it away? I don't know, but it's definitely complicated. The case of the legal cases is also very depending on the country. In Germany, it happens well. In Belgium, they also made several cases where they could even suspend some licenses to Saudi Arabia. based on the national law, but in other countries, it's extremely complicated just to be legitimate. In some countries, as a peace group, you're not legitimate to go to the court because they would consider what's your impact, what's your problem. You are not affected directly, for example, so you can't have a say. So that's also makes the situation more complicated. You really need to adapt to the national situation and use what you have at hand. But in most countries, except maybe France, I think one way or another, you find a way, using international law or some in France, the only case is using victims that would then complain against a company who sold surveillance system to Israel and then was used against Palestine. But I don't know where they are now, but that's the only way they need to have a victim in order to be able to progress.
Okay, more questions, comments? Please come here. Don't forget to take your book. It's free, for free. That's a magic word.
I wanted to ask of you, if you think that fiscal objection is a good way and a useful way to protest against.
Okay. You speak Spanish?
Well, sí, catalán. No. Es que es una manera útil para protestar contra la militar a España, por ejemplo.
Objection fiscal. Okay.
Muy rápido.
You have to speak.
Bueno, pues sí, claro que lo es. Lo que pasa, siendo muy potente, es algo que cuesta mucho de llevar a cabo. Objeción fiscal quiere decir no pagar al Estado la parte proporcional de tus impuestos que tienen que ver con el gasto militar del Estado.
Okay, 1 second. So yes, it's a useful tool. However, it's really hard to implement it to do because fiscal objection is to not pay to the state the proportion that would go to the military.
Digo que es difícil de hacer porque la gente es reacia, me duele lo que voy a decir, a desobedecer y a no cooperar con el Estado. Y esos son los dos fundamentos más importantes de la paz. Mira que digo, de la paz.
Why do I say it's difficult to implement? Because people in general are hesitant or they don't really feel comfortable disobeying the state.
Antes he hecho referencia a que los cambios que se están produciendo positivos para derrocar regímenes autoritarios o enfrentarse al Estado cuando algunos espacios de nuestras insuficientes democracias no son democráticos, nos enfrentamos a ellos ¿de qué manera? Y lo he dicho, de manera no violenta, de manera no a través de la lucha armada. Y tenemos estas dos herramientas que son fundamentales, no cooperar y desobedecer al Estado en aquellos ámbitos que consideramos que vulneran la democracia. Por lo tanto, la objeción fiscal es una de ellas.
Okay, so basically it's this disobedience and this non-cooperation with the state when they're implementing measures that we don't agree with, that we don't consider ethical. Those are basic components of peace, always in a non-violent form. Therefore, if people are hesitant or they don't feel comfortable disobeying or not cooperating with the state, these measures, it's going to be really hard to promote this fiscal objection as a general tool.
O somos conscientes de que cuando hablamos de empoderamiento, que el poder está en nosotros y no lo delegamos en el Estado, es que somos capaces de transformar y cambiar nuestras sociedades. Por lo tanto, hay muchas herramientas, no me voy a referir a todas las que podemos utilizar, pero antes he hecho referencia a Black Lives Matter, a Greta Thunberg, a Occupy the Streets. Bueno, esas son las herramientas. En Cataluña también ha habido movilizaciones a favor de la posibilidad de que Cataluña pueda acceder a el derecho a la autodeterminación, y lo ha hecho de forma pacífica, pero no utilizando nunca, ojalá lo hubiera hecho, hubiera conseguido mucho más, la desobediencia y la no cooperación. Y eso lo digo para los amigos catalanes aquí presentes, no utilizando esa herramienta, que es poderosísima. Es la herramienta más poderosa que hizo posible que la India se independizara de un imperio.
So the power is in us, not in the state. That's why we see these movements such as Black Lives Matter, we see Greta Thunberg and the environmental movement. And even here in Catalonia, we've seen like peaceful movements promoting emancipation, independence. But that's the key. All of these movements have to be non-violent. Therefore, that's why we have to use disobedience and non-cooperation as tools to achieve the peace movement.
Okay, so I think this is a good way, no, to finish. Thanks to all for coming. I think it's a good way to finish, that we can change things without cooperation with the state. And please go to the peace party. Thank you.